Good evening, friends. Good evening, Brendan. Good evening, Joe.
Good evening, Father.
Welcome back to Sunday Night Live. Brendan, at a distance.
Oh,
Yep. I'm at a distance. I'm self-isolating at the moment.
What a shame. You were able to be with us last Sunday. Well, the last couple of Sundays, but obviously, little did we know last Sunday when we had that great chat with Tim in New South Wales that we'd be back on lockdown this week.
I know.
And we
I got myself a little bit of a cold, so I thought I'd go and get the thing up my nose.
Yeah, tell us more, because I was having dinner and someone let me know that you actually have to have it twice now. They're doing two tests.
They are. Yeah, well, look, I went through a little drive-through clinic. I booked in, and I went through the drive-through clinic. I felt like McDonald's. And yeah, 3 swabs. She had 3 swabs in her hand, and I was like, they're not all going up one nostril, surely. And no, what they do is they take one. I don't know what they're doing at other clinics, but at this one, they did one at the back of my throat, enough to make you gag, and then one up one nose, and then one up the other nose. So it was the full experience, you know.
And have you got the results?
No, I haven't. So I've been told, other people have said that they got results back in like a day or a couple of days, but she said that they've been completely flat out. So I've been told it can take up to 7 days. I have to and self-isolating until then. But I'm pretty sure that it had all the normal symptoms of just a normal common cold. Didn't quite have I think the big indicator I've heard at the moment is a loss of sense of smell.
Yeah.
oh
Didn't
no.
have that. And I didn't really have a fever, and I've recovered very quickly. So I reckon it was just a little common cold, but it wasn't the best of timing. It's not the best time in the world to catch a cold.
No. And if you're listening tonight, either through Facebook or through YouTube, and you've had the COVID test and you had a horror story or a good story, make sure you add it to the combox, because we really enjoy engaging with you as much as we can. And I suppose if we're looking for advantages, silver linings in lockdown, and that is that Melbourne Praise has gone back to its daily prayer routine of the morning prayer, the rosary, and the chaplet each day, which also forced us this time to go through and learn how to use Wirecast. And now, of course, we can stream to two platforms. So from all those weeks ago when we started this little enterprise, Brendan, and we barely knew what we were doing, we're now going live on Facebook and on YouTube. So feel free to comment. Yeah, it is. And there's 3 of us.
There you go.
So if you are watching on Facebook tonight, thanks for joining us this evening.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, and you're welcome, Joe. You had a bit of a spot sort of
Yeah, that's right.
guest hosting a couple of weeks back, and we've brought you back for a second attempt. So what's your week been like?
Oh, Father. My week's been pretty crazy. Like, I was planning to run a youth retreat on Saturday, and then we got the news on Tuesday or Monday. Can't remember. Either way, we got the news, and I've had to cancel it. So I've picked up a few shifts at Woolies, which has been fun. But yeah, nothing major to report. So
I had to close my church for the first time. Don't laugh at that. If you remember, 15 weeks ago, I was away. I was overseas. So
Indeed.
I didn't actually have to do the first lockdown. So it was it Wednesday the announcement was made? Wednesday was our last set of public masses. So I had that experience of actually having to tell people that they weren't going to be able to come and receive the sacraments the next day. And it's just absolutely counterintuitive for the life of a priest, because we're ordained to celebrate the sacraments and to offer them for the people. So to actually say to people, I'm sorry, this will be the last time you'll receive the sacraments for the next 6 weeks, was just, I'm normally pretty steely, but I got a little bit emotional because just to see the devotion on people's faces and a real hunger for the Eucharist in particular. So again, just that reminder now, though, that although the churches are closed here in Melbourne, that Mass hasn't stopped. That every priest around the diocese in every church is celebrating Mass every day for his people. So that hopefully that brings some consolation to people that Mass is still being offered, the sacrifice of the Mass, and that you can unite yourself through a spiritual offering of communion to that great sacrifice each and every day. So so that's what I had. Anything else big happened this week for you, Brendan? How's the cello going?
Oh, well, here it is. It's still looking pretty on my left, and I've done absolute. No. Look, it's not.
So an ISO goal for you can be that you've got another 6 weeks now of lockdown.
Actually, that's a really good point.
To continue with that cello lessons.
I know. To be honest, it's sort of like my guitar playing has gotten really good though. Hey, this string is loose. I haven't noticed.
You should be inspired this week. A very famous musician and film score writer, and I'm gonna get his name wrong, but it's Ennio or Enrico or Ennio Morricone. Wrote scores to many famous movies, in particular The Mission, which some of you may have seen with Robert De Niro in it. It was, definitely when I was at school, it was part of the religious education curriculum. It was probably the closest thing I got to learning about the priesthood in my Catholic education was watching that movie in year 11. But I've shared with some of you before the story that this soundtrack from it, Gabriel's Oboe, which some of you might know that piece of music, played a very particular point in my vocation story because I'd heard it in year 11 when I was at school, and then a couple of years after school when I was doing some volunteer work with the St. Vincent de Paul Society, I was on their stall at the Vocations Expo that was hosted here in Melbourne in 2003 in the exhibition buildings. And it was this massive Vocations Expo. And I'd happened to be I was a university student at the time. I'd been at a pub crawl the night before. So I was probably feeling a little bit less than virtuous. And I was stuck in the Melbourne exhibition building all day with thousands of Catholic school kids coming through this expo, and you've all been to something like ACYF or World Youth Day. You know what these expos are like, noisy, full of action. And I spent there all day, and it just so happened that the stall that I was on for young Vinnies backed on to Corpus Christi College, the regional seminary stall. Insane. And they had decided to make a video back in the day when it was still videos on seminary life. And it was a 3-minute video that had Gabriel's Oboe as the soundtrack to it. And it was on loop all day. So I had 8 hours with an incredible hangover, sort of listening to this soundtrack that actually linked me back to my year 11 RE class. So when I heard he'd died during the week, I was a little bit disappointed. But that piece of music sort of still sends chills down my spine for good reasons and bad reasons when I hear it. Brendan, it's time. It's Brendan's top 5. We promised that we'd have a sound grab or something this week, but we haven't done it, so we might have to do it for next week. Brendan's top 5.
Yes.
What's your top 5 this week?
So this week is look, it's themed because we're going back into lockdown. So one ought to know, and I think this might be very useful for our listeners and I'm curious to see what their tops are as well. But what's your this is Brendan's top 5 Uber Eats.
Right. Top 5 for Uber Eats for lockdown.
For lockdown. So these are some of the meals that you gotta get delivered to your door. Now
because you're too ashamed to walk into the shop and pick up yourself.
Well, excuse me, Father. I'm self-isolating at the moment, and I am not actually permitted to go out. So I'm giving back to the local community as Uber Eats is currently promoting, you know. So, number 5. Now, actually, should I say this now? Should I say? I'll say that after. Remind me to say what I was about to say afterwards. Number 5 is Indian. You got getting some Indian curry, a little bit of curry in a hurry.
Indian curry, nondescript Indian curry. Number 5. Okay, we're going to fly through these tonight.
The food of your people in Brendan.
The food of your people. Number 4.
I'm 1/8 Indian as well. But that's
Jerry's very happy. She's just very excitedly added to the combox that Indian is your number 5. Number 4, Brendan.
Apologies, there's a little bit of lag, so if I'm a bit slow tonight, that's why. I'm usually slow anyway. Number 4 is Subway cookies.
Wow. That's very specific.
So look, don't bother with the rest of the sub. Just order the cookies, you know, because everyone knows that a cookie in isolation is just about the greatest thing that you could be eating right now. But it's only on number 4, so it's actually not the greatest thing. I'm just going to move on to number 3. I think
Keep going. Number 3.
Number 3 is you got to get something from the Rice Workshop. I don't know if that's all around Melbourne.
Ooh.
But very specifically, if you haven't eaten chicken katsu before, that needs to be ordered and delivered to your home because
so
the sauce
good.
on that thing is so. Yeah, you with me, Joe?
Oh man, I'm there with you.
I've been told though the inside goss is that you don't get the rice anymore. You actually want to get I think the noodles or the I don't know, ramen. I don't know.
Okay.
But apparently. Yeah, you get more chicken that way.
It's that good that it's got inside goss about it. That's great.
Yeah, look,
Indian
the
Subway
Reddit
cookies,
Reddit
chicken
community.
katsu from the Rice Workshop. Number 2.
Number 2 is kebab.
Yes.
Now, for those of you who are listening for the first time tonight, I want to apologise because this is where the podcast goes on a complete tangent because Brendan has been on a kebab mission for the last 4 or 5 weeks. So have you worked out where the best kebabs on your side of town are, Brendan?
I kind of missed a little bit of what you were saying there, but yeah, that was inspired by that tangent and just a message to Jerry because I know that she's probably watching. Apologies once again for that little tangent that went on. However, I do submit and I do admit I got it wrong.
Wow. Humility.
What I was talking about is a shish kebab. But a kebab is very much a thing put between pita bread. It's shredded meat in pita bread. That's a kebab. I literally ate. I went out with a mate the day after and I got myself a kebab and I held it in my hands and I said, yeah, this is a kebab.
I think we have dedicated too much time on the internet already to you and trying to work out what a kebab is. So let's move on to number 1, your lucky last.
Here we go.
I might just start a podcast dedicated to kebabs. I don't know if anyone's interested in watching or listening. I might get Jerry would be on board.
I'm around
Number
it.
1. Look, it's a little bit boring, but it's just obvious. Like if you're gonna get something delivered, it's got to be pizza.
Classic.
There's nothing else.
You're a man of simple tastes, Brendan.
I'm a man. That's it. Look, I'm about that. Like, get myself the best pizza joint in the place in the whole of Wezza. And that's
He's a youth
Italia
minister.
Pizza in Werribee. Italia Pizza. Everyone remember that the next time that you head to Werribee. I know it's going to be a long time because we're currently in like some severe lockdown and all of the cases are coming from Wyndham. That aside, Italia Pizza is fantastic. Get yourself the margarita from there. That's my top 5.
Okay, Joe, what's your number 1? Top 1, Uber Eats, cheap meal during lockdown.
I don't have Uber Eats because this is why. I know if I get it, all my money will be out the window. So I just do the normal classic, just order takeout and drive down and get it. I know I'm a pleb. I'm sorry.
And what would it be if you were going to drive down to pick it up?
Oh, I tried Hungry Jack's Hunger Tamers. That was just... Hungry Jack's is a bit of hit and miss. You can't go wrong with Yo My Goodness. I don't know. It's a very like southeast thing, I think. But you can't go wrong. burgers,
I'd have
chips.
to agree with you on that. My life was ruined when we found out that you could get Yo My Goodness through Uber Eats. So
Oh, you're joking.
yeah, life has never been the same. So we've had a few congratulations in the Combox, Brendan, to you and pizza as your top choice. So well done. You've got a few fans out there. This
it. And
Sunday
Ari
obviously has been
a little bit earlier about the smoothest sponsor transition that we've ever seen. Not in fact sponsored by Uber Eats. However, what's that ad commercial that they were doing during like tonight? I'll be eating pizza.
We've been calling out for international guests and now for sponsors. So surely at some point someone will pick us up on the podcast.
Yeah, my goodness, you know where I live.
So obviously with a lot of people not being able to make it to Mass this weekend, hopefully you've been able to keep the Lord's Day in your own ways at home, whether that's by watching a televised Mass or reading the scriptures. We had a lovely gospel today that again continues on for us from what we've been hearing over the last few Sundays. But in particular, it's the parable that Jesus gives us about the sower going out to sow. And I had to say to a couple of people who were able to be in my congregation today because they live in very close proximity that parables about plants and planting and gardening are pretty much lost on me because there's one thing that I don't know a lot about, and that's plants and planting. And if anyone who's been to my presbytery would know, there's a couple of dead lemon trees sitting right outside my back door for a little while as a real good evidence of the fact that I don't know much. But this parable actually really speaks to very much our human experience. And you don't have to know a lot about plants to sort of know that as long as we keep trying to do things on our own, we generally pretty much fail dismally. And when we look at this gospel and this parable and we think of ourselves as the sower going out to sow, we're actually putting ourselves in the wrong position. And that the parable is actually really reminding us that we're the soil. And that the Lord is going out to sow, and that he's spreading his grace throughout the world, and that we have to be receptive to that. And I think that's something that sometimes we need to remind ourselves, because sometimes we try to work really, really hard at things to be better, to be holier, to improve. And we have to be reminded that it's God's grace that's gonna do the improving. It's the Lord who's the first mover in it, and sometimes we actually just need to be a little bit more like soil, which sounds a bit strange, I know, but you've got to be a bit more like soil, Joe.
Oh,
be a little bit more receptive and ready to receive. And I think Jesus uses a number of those analogies of plants that grow up and then that get scorched by the sun, and plants that grow up and get tangled by the thorns. And I think we've probably all had those periods in our spiritual life where we've had these moments, and it may have been after something like World Youth Day or going to a big youth festival, where we grow really fast, but then something happens and it dies off, or it grows really fast and then it gets tangled up in the fears and the anxieties and the sinfulness of the world in which we live, and it dies off. So how do we cultivate really rich soil? And I suppose the challenge as well at the moment in lockdown here in Melbourne is, how do you do that when so many of the usual tools that we have to do it are out of our reach? Brendan, what about you? Is there anything that you're doing now that we're going back into lockdown to sort of really continue to be open to God's grace?
I really doubling down on a bit of spiritual reading. As in the Catholic faith, we've been given just an absolute treasury of incredible writings from the saints and from incredible authors. And I think that just taking that opportunity to kind of crack into the books that I'd really like to read. No better time no better time. So I think for me, that's what I'm going to be doing. Continuing praying the rosary. I think as a family as well, there's no better opportunity when you're all you're in the home together, and I think that praying the rosary together really helps to just bring peace into the family home, because it's, that families pray together, stay together, but the families that pray to Our Lady and invite her into their lives, it's next level. She's the Queen of Peace, so it certainly helps.
What about you, Joe? Is there anything you're doing now that we're going back into lockdown?
Yeah. There's a recent challenge that my friend put to me. It's 3 chapters of the Gospel a day for 30 days, and you get through all 4. I really wanted to do it. It's just so much willpower involved, so I hope if you can keep me in the prayers to try to do it. But yeah, 30 days, 3 chapters a day. That's the challenge. So, and try to keep up the rosary as well, Brendan. So.
And I think it is. One thing that I thought to myself during the week was 6 weeks here of lockdown is like another Lent. Now, we don't necessarily always want another Lent. Lent is often hard enough as it is, and one a year is enough. But for each one of us, we've been presented with this opportunity now to grow again.
Indeed.
So the other thing, I suppose, and I was having a chat with Joe about this during the week, it didn't take long after we got released out of the last lockdown for me to start sort of going back to some old ways. You make all these resolutions during lockdown, and then as soon as the doors were open and we were able to get out, I noticed I'm started to slip back. So it's almost as if, not that we'd ever have asked for it, but we've been presented with another opportunity to go back and sort of say, okay, well, what was I doing right in that first lockdown that I already started to see slipping when we were allowed out and about? And what can I sort of try and solidify over these next 6 weeks?
It's a great observation, Father.
But there is obviously some challenges in lockdown, and one of the great challenges, of course, is that we're spending a whole heap more time locked in our homes, generally locked in our bedrooms, and generally locked and spending a lot of time in front of our computers, which is it's really providential that we're able to have on the program tonight Paul Ninnes, who is the Managing Director of Real Talk Australia, based in Brisbane, but has also recently, in the last lockdown, started the Porn-Free movement. So Paul's been patiently waiting in the waiting room, and there he is. Thanks for joining us tonight, Paul.
G'day, guys. It's good to be here from Brisbane.
Yeah, you're obviously under a lot less restrictions than what we are up there now. What's it been like getting out and about?
Well, yeah, it feels weird hearing you guys speak the way you're speaking, and I've got a little bit of a delay here, so hopefully it's working okay. The NBN is a long way between Melbourne and Brisbane. But it feels like a different world. The only thing that speaks to me of the Melbourne lockdown is that I keep seeing all these Melbourne football teams at the Gabba, which seems really weird. But it's almost like I forget that you guys are going through this.
Yeah. And I was just saying that one of the challenges for people here in Melbourne is obviously now being locked in our homes, and in particular locked in front of our computers. And I know that during COVID-19, you saw a great need in this area and started the Porn-Free movement. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, definitely. Where it started was with a guy at a men's weekend, and he basically came to me after a men's weekend and said, Paul, we need to do something. We need to get a porn-free brand out there. We need to try to encourage people to choose to be porn-free. And this was sort of 6 months, a year ago, and I was busy at the time and thought about it and thought it was a good idea, but didn't think too much more of it until during lockdown, I was on a Zoom call with a bunch of national Christian men's leaders. And we were 5 minutes from the end, and someone said, is there any other important topics that we haven't covered yet that sort of affecting men and the community during this lockdown period? And I sort of took myself off mute and said, I think the topic of pornography is really huge. And within seconds, a bunch of guys on that Zoom call sort of leant forward and took themselves off mute and said, hey, can you help us out, Paul? You know, what can we do? What can we say? What resources can we supply our, church communities? And in 5 minutes, I couldn't give them all the answers, but I said I'd come back to you. And I went away and rang up the bloke who'd sent me the logo, the Porn-Free logo, and said, I think now could be the time. And that's how the Porn-Free movement started.
Wow.
Paul, can you share with us a little bit, and you've done lots of research in this area, we know that pornography use affects both young men and young women, and we might have a bit of a chat about young women in a minute, but can you share with us a little bit why we know it's much more addictive and influences young men in particular?
Yeah, I think for guys, and I don't want to overly simplify it because it's not just a male problem, but for guys, there's a much more visual aspect in our sexuality. So pornography has a natural attraction, a natural stimulation for most men. If you think of it, we need to be the initiator when it comes to sexual intercourse. There's something that has to happen in men for sex to occur, for procreation to occur. Whereas in a female's body, it happens more naturally. This is not to say that women aren't visually stimulated, but even the neuroscientists who research pornography would suggest that there's a different mechanism in women, particularly those who become addicted to porn. Often there's a different learning and a different neurological mechanism. So for everyone, but in a particular way for guys, porn is just super attractive and super appealing, and it usurps some of the reasoning and the thinking and the moral grounding they may have, because it gets such a strong reaction neurologically for guys.
We would all know some guys who would say, I'm just dabbling. It's just something that I'll do now. And sometimes we'll find it in Christian men in particular. I'll stop when I start having sex. When I get married. It's just a boyhood problem, and sometimes it'll even be sort of promoted as that by teachers and people that they trust. Is that true?
The short answer is no. And my own story was one of making a decision to give up pornography, and it wasn't until I stumbled and went back and looked at porn that I really realized I needed help. I needed God's help, and I needed to do something, because I'd made a really firm decision that I was never going to look at it again. But I've journeyed with a lot of young guys, and particularly in the time leading into marriage and into the first years of marriage. And I can say almost all the time, not all the time, but almost all the time, if you have a problem with pornography or you're a porn user before marriage, you're going to struggle with pornography after you're married.
Yeah, and I think from my priest experience and my experience counselling young guys before marriage and after, I'd definitely say that that's true also. And it can do a great deal of damage to relationships and to wives and children down the track as well, when children become aware. And I think it was Jason Evett who once spoke about the fact that what would your children think if they found your internet browser history? How betrayed would they feel? But we have very much the experience of wives who have a great sense of betrayal when they find that their husbands have been using pornography. What would you say then to a young guy who's listening tonight who might be struggling in this area? Have you got any, I suppose, concrete tips?
There's a lot to say, and I could speak for a long time on this. The first thing I would say is you are not alone, and what you're going through is something that many people have gone through. In fact, most people in today's generation, in today's era, have gone through it. And so you are not condemned by me. It was my problem. It's many people's problem. Many really, really good people struggle with the habit of porn. And so you are not alone. I want to encourage you to speak out about it. Talk to someone. Talk to your priest in the Sacrament of Confession, but speak vulnerably with a trusted person. I think bringing your problem into the light is half the battle. And then there's a lot more I could say. On the Porn-Free movement website, I've got a little video which uses something called the grit analogy. which stands for get away. Paul says flee from sexual immorality, so it's just get away as quickly as you can. Resist. St. Augustine, I think it was, said habit, if not resisted, soon becomes necessity. So you've got to continually resist. Inform yourself. Learn about the psychology. Learn about yourself. Learn about the neurology of pornography and how it works. So inform yourself. And then talk to someone about it, and that can start your journey. There's so much more to it, but the grid analogy, I think, can be a great help for people.
I think that last point, Paul, is a really important one, especially when it comes to young Catholics, and being willing to speak outside the confessional. One piece of advice I give to young men quite regularly is that whilst confession is key to healing, the next step has to be a willingness to share with another trusted person. It might be a priest, it might be a friend, it might be a parent, what's going on. Because one of the things that I think pornography really does for a young guy is traps him in a cycle. And sometimes confession can become just part of that cycle. And often the first step to breaking that is being able to have that conversation with somebody outside the confessional.
Yeah, look, I think you're really insightful, and I think that's true. I think for me, the Sacrament of Confession was huge, and I think it is for anyone who's a Catholic and wants to break free of a struggle with pornography. But you need to journey, and you need to journey with someone of the same sex, someone who's not going to condemn you, and someone who's going to be able to journey with you and understand. So you don't go share with your great auntie or your mum who, thinks pornography is disgusting. You need to find usually a fella if you're a bloke, and a female if you're a female, and someone who you think is going to understand. And there's a lot more people who understand this than you think. Realistically, if you go and talk to someone, the chances are they will have some experience, usually personal experience with this. And just a week ago, I sat down with a couple of blokes over a picnic table in a park, and I set them up with a brotherhood accountability relationship, so they could talk on a regular basis about how they're going, keep each other accountable, pray for each other, and just journey together.
That's amazing, Paul, about the brotherhood thing that you were talking about. I have a question about the response to the Porn-Free movement. Have you received any emails or weird messages about it?
Yeah, look, firstly, maybe to tell everyone watching what the Porn-Free movement is, in some ways, it essentially, there's a website, pornfreemovement.com, but we have also sort of launched on Facebook and taken off in the first couple of weeks on Facebook before sort of Facebook themselves are sort of putting in a few barriers that are making it hard for it to spread. But I think we had close to 20,000 likes in the first fortnight, over 250,000 impressions, over 38,000 engagements.
Wow.
And so we're just basically trying to increase awareness to enable people to actually bring up this topic and spread it through social media and in their circle of influence, and also to connect people to somewhere where they can get help. And we've set up the website so that it's a great portal for finding everything you need. Simple videos through to books and websites and resources, everything you can need. And more of a secular approach. You'll see some obvious names on there of great Christian and Catholic authors. But we've tried to use non-faith-based reasoning so that it's a platform that can go wider than just those who are practicing Christians or Catholics. We have had an interesting response. We've had everything from there's a lot of people out there, sadly, who want to get into pornography. So we've had people contact us who want to get into porn. We've had people who are just basically saying, you guys, you've got your work cut out for you, but I am for you. But probably the most interesting message was from a sex shop worker in London who said he found us on Instagram. And we haven't done much on Instagram, so I don't know how he found us, but he did. And he sent us this message saying, it's kind of ironic, but I have liked your movement and I am supporting you guys. And it's ironic because I sell pornography. He sells it on DVDs. And he said, yep, some guys, some over 50 still buy DVDs of pornography. But he said, my kids are in their 20s. And even though I sell pornography, I am worried about kids these days, and I'm worried about the future for my children because of just the abundance of porn and the style of porn that people are accessing on the internet. So I found that one of the most peculiar and interesting responses, that a sex shop worker is against pornography on the internet and wanted to support our movement. So that's the most interesting one.
Crazy.
I think it's important, Paul, that we recognise and acknowledge that it's not just a faith-based problem, and that there is people all over the sort of spectrum who are starting to acknowledge the negative effects of pornography on the individual, on the user, but also on those, I suppose, involved in the industry. Could you share with us, we spoke a little bit about relationships, but some of the other sort of negative side effects that we know that pornography has?
Yeah, well, look, the list is quite long. I encourage people, and I've got a video on the Porn-Free movement about this, that a great way to start to speak about this with people, if you want to make a bit of a public stand, is just the harms to children. I think most people, regardless of where they sit on the moral spectrum, believe that kids should have the freedom to be kids. And at the moment, it's close to 100% exposure to hardcore pornography before you're 18. So I've just had a baby, and the idea that he has no chance of reaching adulthood without having his concepts of what sex is about infiltrated by pornography is devastating for me as a dad. So the effects on kids are well documented, and there's a lot of research showing that it affects their sleep, it affects their relationships, it affects their academic performance, it affects their permission-giving beliefs. So this is a huge one, particularly for the male demographic. Watching pornography really impacts how you see women, how you objectify them, how you think about them, what you will and won't do, not just in the sexual encounter, but in the lived experience. So kids is the first one, and I can go on, but the other big one would be violence. The research on violence is abundant, and secular research. This is not sort of moral-based or Christian researchers. These are secular researchers who say the research is in. We've known for over a decade now that it is conclusive that pornography leads to violence against women. Now, this doesn't mean every individual porn user is affected in the same way. So please don't hear me as saying that if someone uses porn, they're going to beat up a female or be okay with violence against women. I'm not saying that. But overall, there is a correlation, and there's also research that has shown a causation. In other words, if people watch porn and they track how they think about women and act against women, there is a link to violence. So 6 times more likely to be okay with violence against women, more likely to be violent in relationships, not just in the sexual realm, but just generally. Just an abundance of research, but it goes on and on. Attractions to the opposite sex, so it lowers your attraction to the opposite sex. Relationship breakdown, increased rates in relationship breakdown with those who are porn users. But again, every person is affected differently, and I don't want to be too full on with quoting all these stats. They're shocking, but I do want to remind people that there is great hope, and most people are exposed to porn these days. So please know that you're not doomed. There is a pathway out, and we'll probably get to chat about that.
Well, I think that's a really important point, because I think one of the greatest effects that I see of pornography in my ministry is that it starts to affect the way a person views themselves. That they get so entrapped in the cycle of use of pornography that they lose any hope that they're ever going to get out. And then they start to view themselves through the lens of the fact that they're a pornography user. And that's not in any way the way that God views them. And it's the greatest trick of the devil, that they start to believe of themselves that this is their very being, where it's not. It's a part of their behaviour that they've been trapped in. And as you point out, I think the stats in Australia at the moment is average first use for a young man, I think, is something like 12 years of age, first viewing of pornography, and that's primary school. So for many users, they've been trapped in it as long as they can remember, and that affects how they see themselves. What are some concrete steps? So you spoke about getting away, resisting, informing yourself and talking to people about it. But have you got any other concrete steps? I suppose especially for people who are locked in their houses at the moment. You can't necessarily get away. They can't necessarily talk with people as maybe they would. But some other concrete steps for someone who might be feeling sort of really bogged down by this at the moment?
Yeah, look, and you've covered a few things there in what you've said, fella Nick. The first exposure is even younger than that these days. And 20% of Australian teenage males said they started viewing porn at age 8 or younger in one particular bit of research. So this is something that happens to us as children, and often it's not our fault. It's not our fault as kids that we're exposed to porn and we develop this. So that idea of the shame that people feel, it's really important to speak into that, as you just did, and maybe we can cover that again, but just acknowledging the Father's love and that how much he loves you. And the story of the prodigal son is just the benchmark here, just that God wants to take us back in his arms and celebrate over us, even when we've done something that is something we know that is against his will. As far as concrete steps, one would be to actually try to break that shame cycle, to actually bring things into the light, to speak to someone, and to actually spend time meditating on God's love and just acknowledging that God is bigger, and that this sin, this stuff up, this choice, and sometimes it's not a choice, is not the deepest part of you, that God loves you, and at your deepest part you are broken and in need of a saviour, but at the same time you are just whole and perfect in God's image. So acknowledging that. And then another acronym, I love acronyms, but I use an acronym called the PASS acronym, which stands for Prayer, Accountability, Scripture, and Sacraments. And there's some real tangible things. So praying, and not just praying every day, which you should do, but praying in the moment of temptation. So if you look at porn on your phone, every time you pick your phone up, say a little prayer. Or if you look at porn on your laptop, when you open up the laptop, say a prayer. Accountability, there's accountability software. Covenant Eyes is a great accountability software package, but having people who keep you accountable. So giving people permission to ask you how you're going. A brother or a priest or someone who you say, hey, I want you to remind me of the person I want to be, so please ask me whenever you please, but even set a clock on it. Say, I want you to ask me every week. So prayer, accountability, scripture, meditating on certain scriptures, and particularly pick one that you feel that the Lord has for you to help you with this with this battle. And then the sacraments, and as we've mentioned, I think the sacrament of reconciliation is just a beautiful opportunity to not only confess, but more importantly to actually, put yourself under that spiritual shower and get a wash, but also drink of the fountain of God's graces. Because I think we sometimes just think of it as an exchange of, I'm going to take off my baggage, but it's also a chance to receive. It's a chance to actually come out anew.
One of the things I say to guys in the confessional, Paul, is that they should never come to confession just with the sin of pornography use. And it goes back to that point that sometimes it becomes the prism with which we see ourselves, but our life is much broader than that. And sometimes it can blot out some of those other areas of our life. And some of the greatest saints in the church, and we celebrated last week the feast of Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati, just as one example, but those men who have been marked by purity were also men that were marked by charity. And so often guys who struggle in the area of pornography are generally also struggling in other areas of charity, of love, maybe with their own family, maybe with a spouse or a significant other, but also opportunities to go out and serve. So how do we help guys sort of grow and build virtue, and in particular the virtue of love, outside? So in addition to these great things like Covenant Eyes, I mentioned last week Brain Buddy. I don't know whether you've seen the app Brain Buddy, but there's great apps and resources out there. Having an accountability partner, but you should also get your accountability partner to see how much ministry or work or service or volunteering you've done in the last week. So it's not just about this question of have I or have I not watched porn this week, but it's have I been a man who's gone out of his way to serve others in the daytime, And I think if we can be helping guys really grow in this area, and see themselves in this holistic sort of sense rather than just through this one prism, it's going to be really helpful. We've been talking a lot about young guys, but we do know that this problem affects women as well. Have you got anything to say? Because especially that question of shame, I know that a lot of young women feel shame because they think that they might be the only women who are dealing with the problem.
Yeah, look, thank you, and thank you for doubling back, because we too often, and I've done it, have just spoken about this as a male-only problem. Just let me throw some stats out there firstly. We know quite accurately from the world's biggest porn website that, in fact, even in Melbourne, they release city-specific statistics. So in Melbourne, I think from memory, it was 33% of the porn users from Melbourne are females on the world's biggest porn website. So approximately 1 in 3. Other research also out of Melbourne actually found that 1 in 5 females in the 15 to 29 year age group looked at porn weekly or daily. And for males, it was 4 in 5 looked at porn weekly or daily in the 15 to 29 year old age group. So pretty high figures, but I say those to just acknowledge that this is not just a male problem. For females, the shame factor can be, even huger than for guys. I think maybe it was Christopher West or Jason Ebbett spoke about how for guys, porn's a bit like everyone in the one prison cell, but for women, it can be like a female in solitary confinement. It can feel different for a female. So I want to encourage you as a female to, again, reach out to someone, confess, but also reach out to a female that you think is worldly enough to understand that this is a problem. And again, I just want to tell you that you're not alone. There's plenty of girls in your parish, in your youth group who have struggled with this. And we're about to release a multimedia sometime this month, which is 2 females that are friends of mine, 2 females that have worked with Real Talk, who share about porn's impact on their life. And when we release that, I would love people to share that, because we need to get the message out that this is something that impacts women greatly when males use it, but also impacts them greatly in their own lives and how they use it. And I think when we do that, the enemy is going to be really angry, because we're just going to lower the shame factor and allow more people to bring this into the light and therefore get healing. So please pray for that multimedia, because we just don't have enough public women sharing about this particular problem, especially in the church. There's not many.
Can you, how else can people be involved in the movement? So it's obviously on Facebook, liking the page. Is there anything else that people can do, especially during this time?
Yeah, definitely. And look, I would love, people in Melbourne, if you can really jump on board, because there are lives that are going to be affected by this. Liking the Facebook page would be one thing, but we're having some issues at the moment with Facebook that they're putting some restrictions on because of algorithms and the word porn and what have you. But please like the page. If you're super brave, we encourage people to put a porn-free banner on their profile picture. So you can just do that the same way you put a frame on any profile picture. And it's having an amazing impact. I was speaking to a guy in Sydney just this week, and he has been someone who's wanted to speak out about this topic for a long time, but it wasn't until he put this picture frame on his Facebook profile picture did people start to question him about what's this porn-free thing, and it gave him an opportunity to speak to his mates at a party about the issue of pornography. And he wasn't condemned by his secular mates, because, as I said, there's a lot of common ground on this. Most reasonable thinkers get that there's a problem with the accessibility and just the volume of pornography that's being consumed. And so that's what you can do is jump on Facebook. We're on Instagram and Twitter as well, so please like us on there. If you're really brave, put the frame on, and that might open some great discussions. And if you want some great resources, can you check out our website, pornfreemovement.com. There's links, there's books, there's videos, and we're going to release campaigns as time comes on. So please stay in the loop.
I think it's great work, and I think it's really important because, as you've said tonight, it's really pivotal that people know that they can overcome this, and that there is people out there who have overcome it. I read a book recently, and they used the analogy of walking through a forest or walking through long grass. And this is the effect that pornography has on the brain, in particular the male brain, but that as you trudge this path through the long grass, it becomes the path, and it's the only way you know. But one of the beautiful things about the brain is that you can retrain it. And when you start walking another direction through the long grass, that becomes the new path. And the long grass will actually grow up and be like it was never there before. So we do know, and I suppose this is the great thing at the moment that science is telling us, is that you might feeling overwhelmed by this problem at the moment, but the science tells us that by taking up some of these great steps that you're talking about, that you can retrain your brain and you can overcome this. And something that at the moment you might feel like you're never going to escape from, it can actually happen. So the more that we can get that really positive message out there, I think the better. Someone in the combox has spoken about the fact that for most people now, pornography is sort of prevalent on television, Netflix, sort of what maybe 20, 30 years ago was considered pornography is now considered pretty mainstream, and especially for young parents. If you've got any advice for parents, because I know a lot of the work that you do through Real Talk is speaking to students in schools and to parents. If you've got any advice to young parents about how they can protect their kids and help their young families?
Yeah, look, we've got lots of advice. And again, on the Porn-Free Movement website, I've got a couple of little pieces for parenting kids and parenting teenagers on this topic. Realistically, we need to get to our kids before pornography gets to them. And that scares parents because they don't want to speak about this topic. But you need to speak about the topic of pornography before kids have access to Wi-Fi. Now, you don't have to speak about porn, but you need to bring up the topic and model how they would act around seeing inappropriate images, because they're going to see inappropriate images. So that's my biggest bit of advice for parents is actually get in before pornography does and start to model what they do when they see inappropriate images. And you don't have to mention pornography, so you don't even have to explain what it is, but you need to talk a little bit about seeing inappropriate images and that there's things on the internet that are good for you and things that are bad for you. And some of the simplest tools, a lady called Wendy Francis has a book called Turn, Think, Tell, and it basically just encourages people to turn away, kids as young as, 4 or 5, turn away when you see something inappropriate, think of something different, and then tell someone. And you know what? When I read the book, I was like, I need to impregnate my mind with those concepts as well, because regardless of whether it's porn in the true sense or how people consider porn now, or just images that are not good for my soul, that are not good for my intimacy with my wife, I need to turn, think, and tell. And so I do that. I do that with my wife. I recently bought a car stereo, and more than 50% of the car stereos were being sold with naked or semi-naked women on it on Amazon and eBay. And I told my wife about that because it got in my mind. It did something to me. I felt the neurochemistry in my sexual makeup start to engage, and so I wanted to turn away, think about something else, and talk to my wife.
I think a great thing about that, and you're speaking about this idea of sort of things that trigger us, is that often we think that it has to be sort of in the immediate sort of time before we use pornography, but a lot of those sort of neurologists and people who are speaking about this now speak about those triggers can happen maybe 12 hours earlier. So being able to identify what's leading you to your pornography use is really key. And it might be things that you've seen whilst you're at work or walking on the street, but also that it's not always a sexual thing, that there may be other things that trigger you to turn to this. So being able to identify those things is really important. And by identifying it, they're being able to turn away or to turn to something else at that point. So again, it's not just necessarily when you're sitting in front of your computer, but it might be a fight with your girlfriend or a bad mark at school or any number of things that could be sort of this thing that sends you into that spiral. But if we're going to identify it, then what can we do when we start the slide? And a great example that someone said to me was, as you're going down a slide, the further down the slide you go, the harder it's going to be to stop. So the sooner you can start identifying what it is that's leading you down this downward slope, the more successful you're going to be in stopping. We're almost out of time, Paul. We've been asking all of our guests over the last few weeks what they learned about themselves during COVID that they want to take into their normal life. And you're from the northern states, so you're back to normal life. Is there something that you learned from COVID-19 that you've sort of implemented in your daily life?
Yeah, and we're not completely back, but we're back to some degree. Still have limitations on numbers, even going to church and what have you. I think for me, it was a really busy period. For a lot of people, it was a slow period, but for me, it was really, really busy. But I think simplifying life and being able to connect deeper with fewer people is probably the thing I want to take away. So that's my family, but it's also just my close friends and my brothers in Christ and my the families that support me and support our family. So I think that's the thing I would take away is go for depth rather than numbers. And we live in this Facebook world where it's not even possible to have 1,000 friends, and yet we kind of kid ourselves that we think we can. And they've shown that in research that we can't. So, I think for me, it was about engaging deeply with fewer.
Well, thank you very much for being with us tonight and for the really wonderful and important work that you're doing. So we just really encourage those who are listening tonight, but also those who might be listening in the weeks ahead, to look up pornfreemovement.com and to support the movement on Facebook and on all social media. So thanks very much, Paul. It's been great to have you, and we continue to pray for the wonderful work you're doing up there for young people all over the place.
Great. Thanks, guys. Great to be here.
Cheers. God bless. That's it, fellas, for another show. It's been another good week.
Indeed.
Brendan, are you still with us? The NBN
Look,
over there in Wyndham.
A couple of seconds behind, but I'm sitting here and I enjoyed that very much. It was great to have Paul on.
So as we mentioned at the start of the show, we're really glad on Melbourne Praise over the next 6 weeks, especially during lockdown, to be praying morning prayer at 7:30 a.m., the Rosary at 12, and the Chaplet of Mercy at 3 p.m. each and every day, live here from Melbourne. So a wonderful way of sanctifying the internet, for want of a better term, but also to reach out. And also aware that a number of you are uni students who'll be going back to classes in the next week or so. So helping you punctuate your day each day with some prayer. So that's back live here on Melbourne Praise, both on Facebook and YouTube. A big shout out to Joe, who this Thursday night, we're going to be premiering a new show here for the next few weeks on Thursday nights at 6:30 called Thursday Praise.
Yeah.
At the best... live from Melbourne. So 6:30 till 7:30, some praise music, some prayers, some meditation, gospel reflection, but an opportunity to gather in prayer. In particular here in Melbourne, we're missing the opportunity to be at 6:30 Holy Hour at the Cathedral. So please join us here live at 6:30 this coming Thursday night. Yeah. If you haven't already, make sure you like the page, facebook.com/Melbourne Praise. And you can download the podcast from both Google Podcasts and Apple Podcasts if you just search Melbourne Praise or Sunday Night Live. Thank you, Brendan. Next week, we're very excited. We've been trying to get these people on for weeks. Nuns are not always the easiest people to get lined up, but we're very glad next Sunday night to be joined by the Dominican Sisters of St. Cecilia, who have a community here in Melbourne in Bacchus Marsh, but they're obviously also in Sydney and originally from Nashville, Tennessee. So they'll be joining us next Sunday night, and they're going to be talking to us about living in solitary, and saints in particular, the saints who have lived in solitary confinement or lived a more solitary life. So that's going to be a great show. So we're really, really excited to have them on with us next week. Thank you, Joe. Thanks, Brendan. I hope you have a good week in isolation, and we look forward to seeing you next Sunday.
Thank you, Father.
Hope the test comes back negative. God bless.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.